With that, let me introduce our first presenter. Matt Hough is Ducks Unlimited Manager for Conservation Programs. He graduated from Oklahoma State University with a bachelor's degree in plant and soil science and a minor in range management. He then graduated from Oklahoma State University with a master's in wetland ecology and studied NRCS's Wetland Reserve Program, wetlands and their functions as compared to reference sites. In 2011, Matt went to work in southern Idaho on the Silver Creek Preserve with the Nature Conservancy as the assistant manager. That winter, he accepted the position with Ducks Unlimited as a biologist. Working at the Grand Island, Nebraska field office, he worked with both public and private lands wetland projects. In 2017, he was promoted to manager of conservation programs for Kansas, where he covers the DU conservation program for the state. Matt works with the various partners in Kansas to deliver a diverse program of restoration, enhancement, protection, and acquisition projects, and serves on several boards and committees, including the Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams, Playa Lakes Joint Venture, and Ducks Unlimited's National Ecosystem Services Committee. I've known Matt a long time. I consider him a friend. We've done a lot of things together. So welcome this morning, Matt. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm not completely sure how to share my screen. I don't know if I got approved yet. Oh, here it is.
Matt, from what I was told, if you are having trouble with it, you may have to leave and re-enter the main session. But beyond that, I'd ask for Kansas Water Office assistance in that.
I just got in. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to just do a brief overview of the Ducks Unlimited program and our conservation programs in Kansas and how they relate to some of the water issues facing the state. So I'm Matt Hough, Manager of Conservation Programs. I'm out of the Grand Island, Nebraska field office, but oversee the state of Kansas conservation program. So just for a brief overview of DU, our mission is to conserve, restore, and manage wetlands and associated habitats for North America's waterfowl. These habitats also benefit wildlife and people. And the vision of DU is wetlands sufficient to fill the skies with waterfowl today, tomorrow, and forever. So consider ourselves the world leader in wetland conservation in our 501c3 organization. We've delivered over 309,000 acres in just 2019 across the continent, and revenue and support was over 235 million. With 85 years now of conservation, we've delivered over 15 million acres. These are projects across the country. As you can see, a lot of that focus is in the prairie pothole region in the Dakotas up into Canada, but we also have a strong program in California, the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, and then expanding all the time in states like Kansas. Kansas DU specifically, we have 17,000 members. Over 125 annual banquet events, if you're familiar with those, which raise over 1.4 million annually. Our conservation staff include myself with 3 biologists in the state, an engineer, as well as our regional engineer in Nebraska, our land manager, and our biological and permitting specialist in Nebraska that works with us in Kansas. So why do we care about wetlands? We care a lot about them from the habitat perspective. Obviously, DU is concerned about waterfowl, but other wildlife as well. But they also provide recreation, erosion control, and they're just aesthetically pleasing in a dry landscape. Specific to what we do, we are providing spring migration habitat primarily. We consider Kansas one of the migration states, which means as the waterfowl migrate from south to north in the springtime, we're providing the food resources that they need to put on fat reserves to build up a healthy condition. So when they arrive to the breeding grounds, they're able to nest successfully and pull off large clutches of ducklings. To provide that food, we manage for weedy annuals, which in most cases we're talking about things like Pennsylvania smartweed, barnyard grass, those early successional plants that provide a lot of food-rich resources. You've probably seen geese and ducks utilizing agricultural fields like cornfields, but those don't provide all the nutritional requirements that those waterfowl need. So these native plants that are good for, that produce a lot of seed are good for habitat and good for the health of the wetland as well. So why is our focus? We're offsetting a lot of the losses that have occurred historically. Kansas is not at the bottom of the list for wetland loss, or the top, however you want to say it, but we have lost between 40 and 60% of the wetland resources in the state. And across the country, we've lost 60 acres of wetland per hour in the last 200 years, which is very unsettling. So what services does DU provide? We provide a lot of different areas of expertise, including technical assistance, professional services, cost share. We do land acquisition and do some conservation easement delivery. I'll go into more detail on each. For technical assistance, we work a lot with public and private lands to provide habitat recommendations, including things like invasive species treatment, water control, management decisions, how to seed the uplands and the buffers, and management of both the wetland and those uplands. We explain a lot of applicable financial programs to landowners and partners, including not only DU, but Wildlife and Parks, NRCS and FSA, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, Department of Conservation, CAUSE, et cetera. And we assist those folks with the program applications and do fundraising for those projects. A lot of that is grant writing and pursuing lots of different federal and state and private funding to get those projects on the ground. Just in the last 3 years since we started tracking private landowners and how many contacts we've had, the 3 biologists and myself have met over 400 landowners and that many or more site reviews in just the last 3 years. So we're pretty busy. Professional services include things with our engineering department, including surveying, design, permitting, construction bidding. So working with contractors for the project to get the contractor bid out, and then working through them through the process, including management of the construction. And we also have wetland mitigation services. We talk a lot about permitting needs. Wetlands are pretty permitting intensive, and we have a specialist with that. We actually have to apply for roughly 7 permits per project, including things like endangered species, working in those restricted water areas with Division of Water Resources, things of that nature, floodplain, working in floodplains. Cost share, we have a lot of opportunities to help offset costs for private and public land projects. This includes all sorts of different aspects like those professional services I mentioned, grass buffer seeding, water control structures, installation of levees. Typically, we do about a 1-to-1 match with non-federal funds through the North American Wetland Conservation Act, or NACA grants. That's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife grant program that provides a lot of our funding. We also get private donor support, and we also work with our partners like through USDA and the state to help piggyback on and offsetting some of those costs. Wetland management is a big topic for us. Grazing is something we really promote. We love grazing on wetlands. We're in the Great Plains. Bison would have historically been a big grazer on these systems, which has been excluded in a lot of areas. So we help producers. We get fence and livestock watering facilities. We do educational workshops. We just had one in September in southern Nebraska. We also have one in July of 22. If you are interested, please let me know. We also have a lot of work with water control structures and managing that water. Moist soil management is typically what we promote, which is a spring drawdown to promote those weedy annuals I mentioned earlier, and then also setting back succession. But you have to have those drawdown periods to have a productive wetland. Drought is a necessary component in the Great Plains. Our wetlands are an ephemeral system. As far as pumping infrastructure goes, we do have opportunities to help offset. So years when there is very little habitat, we like to utilize things like pumping infrastructure to kind of mitigate for that, those drought years, and have some habitat available for migratory birds. Invasive species control. Our biggest concerns in the state are really cattails and phragmites, but also woody encroachment, also both of natives into the wetlands, but also things like tamarisk and Russian olive. And we do a lot of mechanical, physical removal, but also chemical. And lately we've been doing some aerial spraying of things like cattails, which helps reduce the cost and get more acres on the ground. We do assist with land acquisition in some cases. We facilitate some properties with folks like Stuart, but that's typically to restore the natural habitat and protect it, either to get it into a public entity or to work with getting it protected with an easement and returning it to private ownership. We typically have about 6 or 7 properties in the state, typically for 5 years or less. We also work a lot with our land trust partners for conservation easements. We don't hold easements ourselves, but we work with the local land trusts like TNC, Kansas Land Trust, Ranch Land Trust, and others. This is to protect conservation values. So mostly it's a non-development easement to protect from things like mining, subdivisions, that kind of thing. That requires no destruction of the wetlands and grasslands. But the landowners continue to make management decisions such as grazing and haying, and maintain the right for hunting access and the right to lease it for agriculture. These are typically either donated or bargain sale purchased easements, and we can use grants like NACA to help pay for some of those easements. There's a lot of tax incentive benefits as well. And then we also work hand in hand with NRCS for things like wetland reserve easements and agricultural land easements under USDA. We can't do all that without our partners. As I mentioned, we do a lot with state partners, federal partners, and also our grant programs. Besides NACA, we work with NIFWIF and foundations, private donors, all sorts of different groups. We thank you. As far as public lands efforts go, we're pretty well statewide. I've got a few highlighted here. Our main primary priority areas are around Quivira and Cheyenne Bottoms in the central part of the state, Jamestown and Talmo, and down into the Nenaskaw. But we also have a lot of projects going in the eastern and western parts of the state, hopefully more and more with Playas in public opportunities for Playa wetlands. Private lands, definitely the hot spots also are around Cheyenne Bottoms, Quivira, where there's that strong waterfowl culture, but also the Neosho and the Meridazine rivers have a lot of historical interest in working on wetland conservation. But we've seen a large uptick in the Playa region in the west, as well as along the Nenaskaw and some of the tributaries to the Ark River. And also for ratified removal in the Western Ark, the Upper Republican, and then we see a lot of opportunities to expand in areas such as the Kansas River. So I'm going to do a brief overview of some of our wetland programs and how they relate to water issues in the state of Kansas. As we mentioned, Playas and recharge. Playas are depressional ephemeral wetlands that are located in the western third of Kansas. They're the #1 source of recharge for the Ogallala Aquifer. And restoration often includes sediment removal, installation of upland buffers where there was cropland, and that's shortgrass prairie ecosystem type. We also do a lot of hydrological restoration that includes both on-site and off-site things like ditch plugs, filling in pits, installing culverts through roads, and moving terraces, things that are impeding water to getting into those depressional wetlands. We've got a new focus with Playa Lake Joint Venture and a lot of partners in the Greeley and Wichita County area in the west for Playa recharge specific to impacting the aquifer, local aquifer. We're also working with KDH&E in the city of Copeland to look at Playa recharge to decrease nitrates in their drinking water. We've cost shared on over 2,000 Playa wetland acres across the state, and that's always going up. And that's largely due to FSA's CRP 38B program that has rolled over 11,000 acres with Playa wetlands and their buffers. And we hope to see that roll out as a third sign up very soon, which it's been a hugely successful program. We also partner on a workshop, educational workshop for Playas that will be, it's been an annual workshop, and this coming year, it'll be January 11th and 12th in Dodge City. Feel free to reach out to me for more information. So as far as water goes, Playas are huge for aquifer recharge. There are 22,000 individual Playas mapped in Kansas, including 81,000 acres. They're very small on average, 3 acres on average size of the Playa. But the recharge to the aquifer, there's 20,000 acre feet of recharge annually from an acre of Playa wetlands. So in theory, if all of those were functioning properly, that would equate to 6.6 billion gallons annually to the aquifer. The problem is that over 90% of our Playas are not functioning properly due to sedimentation and other impacts. So that's why we're so focused on restoration. We also work a lot in the floodplain areas. This is a FEMA 100-year floodplain map, just to show some of the areas that we will be working in for some of these other practices I'll be talking about. For example, phreatophyte control, that has been a very active program in largely on the Rattlesnake Creek above Quivira, but also in Cheyenne County on the Republican, and we're gaining some traction on the Cimarron and the Western Ark River. Those species, those phreatophytes include things like tamarisk, Russian olive, eastern red cedar, things with tap roots that go into that local alluvial aquifer and tap into those resources and deplete the water. It's estimated that 1 acre foot of water can be returned for each 1.8 acres controlled, phreatophytes controlled, or half of an acre foot per acre removed. This is mostly done mechanically with large equipment for larger trees or chemically for smaller trees. That includes some aerial spraying. It's been really a win-win scenario with our cattle producers and a lot of our conservation partners, because if you're worried about waterfowl, if you're worried about forage production, if you're worried about just the natural health of the ecosystem, it kills all those birds with one stone. So it's pretty awesome partnership in a lot of areas to expand. We do have a workshop on phreatophytes on March 22nd out in Syracuse, Kansas. Wetlands also provide things like flood abatement. Wetlands are earth sponges, and an acre of wetland 1 foot deep, for example, can hold 330,000 gallons of water. And that reduces the magnitude of downstream flooding by retiming the flood, slowing it down, reducing the energy of that flood, and then increasing local aquifer recharge, as you can see in the diagram. That includes things like, again, ditch plugs, sediment removal, installation of levees and structures, and pumping infrastructure. They also provide water quality benefits. They act as Earth's kidneys. On average, an acre of wetland can remove 40 to 70% of excess nitrate loads from 100 acres of cropland runoff. You see a lot of asterisks because a lot of this data is derived from other states. but we are attempting to get more aggressive on the research side to Kansas specific. They can trap a dump truckload up to 13 tons of sediment before it enters rivers and reservoirs annually. And they can remove up to 80% of phosphorus from runoff and cycle out many pesticides as well. Like I said, there's a lot of traction in utilizing wetlands for water quality in states like Iowa, Ohio, Minnesota, but we haven't had as much success yet in Kansas, but we're optimistic that things are trending this way. We do have a good case study at Clinton Wildlife Area, working with the City of Lawrence, Kansas Department of Health Environments, Wildlife Parks and Cause on doing some wetland restoration in specifically looking at the benefits of water quality. And there are ongoing monitoring initiated on that. But there's opportunities like that across the state, especially in these floodplain areas and these RAPS areas where wetlands could be utilized. You hear some argument that it's expensive to do wetlands for water quality, but not really. It is a long-term solution, especially when you utilize things like WRE or wetland easements that are those long-term protection that are 3 to 5 times less expensive per pound of nitrogen and phosphorus removed than other BMPs, some other BMPs. Demand for this is only growing, and we hope things continue to gain steam in Kansas in this arena. These are just some pictures of some example projects, some small levees. You know, we're not talking large dirt work projects. They're pretty minimal. Those are water control structures in the top right that allow you to pull boards to drain the wetlands and provide that moist soil management techniques that we discussed. We're really looking at shallow water. We want it spread over large areas, low embankments, water control structures, so you can draw those down. If you're talking things like a mallard, they will dabble in about 18 inches of water. The smaller dabbling ducks would be even shallower. So, you know, we really are looking at 6 to 12 inches of depth in a lot of our projects, not deep water storage. This is a new wetland restored at Kingman Wildlife Area, Byron Walker. And then also wetlands and climate change. This is kind of a new area of discussion, but wetlands do help store and regulate carbon. If you think about a wetland like, we don't have these in Kansas, but peat bogs, that's a huge amount of carbon being stored by both those peat bogs. And studies support that wetlands like Playas can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, especially when you restore and protect those grasslands and the wetlands. That lack of cropping reduces the released stored carbon through CO2, through oxidation that would be caused by tillage. And there's been some research on increased methane production by wetlands, but this is a natural process. Methane is a natural process, and those drawdowns actually reduce those emissions. And DU was actually recently awarded an RCS grant with USGS to study aspects of wetlands and carbon and CO2 and methane that'll be across the country on CRP projects that include sites in Kansas in that study. They also provide services like recharge, groundwater recharge, flood abatement, and act as natural fire breaks that all help mitigate those other impacts of climate change that will be exacerbated if temperatures climb. One of our new areas of focus has been with Beaver Dam analogs or post-assisted log structures. We've been working with some of our partners on opportunities to implement these. Just think beaver dams without beavers. They're low tech. They're basically putting stakes and brush into incised rivers where you have erosion, or streams and rivers where there's erosion. And it's a restoration technique that's been largely popular in Utah, Colorado, Oregon, some of our western states. But it was recently approved in Kansas as an EQIP practice. So we're kind of just on the cusp of figuring out how to implement these as restoration strategy. We worked with Cause and Juniper and Wildlife and Parks on a conservation innovation grant. We hope to hear back on funding very soon. That included Kansas and Nebraska sites to have more of a Great Plains focus versus more of our mountain areas that where most of these projects have occurred. That includes groundwater recharge, monitoring aspects of groundwater recharge benefits, water quality, sediment storage, effects on stream morphology, fish and invertebrate surveys, looking at flooding impacts and reconnecting those floodplains, and then putting workshops on the ground to help train our biologists and NRCS partners on how to implement these at the county level. We did get a NACA grant awarded recently for acquisition of some of the equipment and materials like posts and post pounders and saws. So we do have some materials that will be available if people are interested. These are just some additional photos. This is a very recent one from Partners for Fish and Wildlife in Utah. These BDAs were installed in April of this year. And by August, you can see a pretty dramatic change as far as the incised kind of ditch of the stream is now a little wider, a little broader. It brought up the elevation by slowing and connecting that small floodplain. This one's really dramatic where it was very narrow incised, eroded stream. And then we get back to cobbles and spreading that water out. And we're hoping that if we can utilize these in some of our streams and rivers, that we can help reconnect those floodplains, restore the hydrology of those wet meadows and areas like that. And with that, I will take any questions.
Matt, you've got oh, wait a minute. I guess that was to everybody. I'm checking the chat questions here real quick.
Okay.
It says when discussing the playas and floodplains, there was a floodplain map shown. Where did you get your floodplain map from? The coverage did not look the same as FEMA's regulatory maps.
It was actually just produced yesterday. One of our ecosystem services people said you should have a map for floodplains that would that kind of go with our Playa map. So I did not make it, but if you have some better data, I can send that to him and update that for sure.
Another question, this is really dramatic. Do you have thoughts about total impacts for sedimentation and recharge that might be obtained?
Is that regarding the Beaver Dam analogs, Mary?
Yeah.
If it is, okay. I do not yet, but that would be part of our conservation innovation grant if we do get it. I think my theory here is as we look at Great Plains BDAs in Kansas and Nebraska, we could probably find that the series, the density of BDAs in a stretch of stream would probably be further apart from each other to have the same benefits as like a very steep mountain stream. That's where most of the research has been done. So we're talking cobbles and gravel, where our systems will be more sands and silts. So that's kind of an area of research that definitely has some gaps and has some opportunities to learn a lot of the benefits.
And do you get a recharge impact from that as well as from the Playas?
Yes. Yeah, if we can slow the amount of time that water is on the site and spread across that floodplain, in theory, you should have some alluvial recharge where if it was just going really quickly through an incised area of the stream, it's going to leave the property faster. So a lot of our ranchers are really interested in BDAs because of that, and being able to reconnect that wet meadow type habitat where the incision has reduced it. In theory, the forage production should go back to more of a historical level if there is more of that river alluvium available. And then also there's talk that it does help with salt cedar recruitment and reducing it, because as you restore that water table in the river alluvium, those natives like willows and cottonwoods are more able to compete against that salt cedar with management, obviously. We actually met with a Red Hills producer Tuesday, and he is very interested in doing some BDAs on some tributaries along the Cimarron. So hopefully we have some better local data for you in a year or two.
That's awesome. Also, with climate change, if the storm intensities tend to change, and our sort of water delivery through precipitation changes, these kinds of structures, it seems to me, are even more important, because we need to, if it's going to be more episodic, we need to be able to recharge as much as we can.
Right, absolutely.
Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat feature, and to keep our time constraints in line, we want to give Jude plenty of time to present too. So Matt, thank you very much for your presentation. Good to see you again, buddy. It's always nice to hear from you, and great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
So Jude, if you're on, we've got Jude Kastens next from the Kansas Biological Survey. Jude spent his first 18 years growing up on a farm in Northwest Kansas. In 1991, he moved to Lawrence for college and has been there ever since. Jude is a research professor working for the Kansas Biological Survey at the University of Kansas. He holds a PhD in mathematics from KU. Since '99, Jude has worked in the Kansas Applied Remote Sensing CARS program at KBS, where he used remote sensing and other GIS data primarily for applications in agriculture and hydrology. And he's going to talk today about LiDAR, which I mentioned earlier has been a huge advancement in technology for us as a department in the wetlands that we're restoring and enhancing. So Jude, I'll turn it over to you.
All righty, thanks, Stuart. I'm surprised we have not yet crossed paths over the years, but I'm sure it'll happen inevitably.
Yep.
I have had the privilege of running in some circles with Matt, Hough, and Abe, and Joe, and the folks at DU, and other of their collaborators, and it's been a privilege, and it's always exciting to see those folks, putting things in action on the ground, helping to actually do some things while I sit over here most of the time in my ivory tower, doing what I guess I consider research. But let me get my my screen up here. So yeah, in the interest of time, I realize, I guess I can push it a little, but they might shut us down with the breakout rooms anyway if they've got a hard stop on that. So I suppose I should try to move quickly with my presentation. What I'm going to show you here is kind of the end result from one component, the mapping component of a couple of different projects that have been administered by the Water Office and using funding from EPA Region 7, a couple of wetland program development grants that have just been fantastic for helping us improve our knowledge and tools that we use to examine and study the wetlands all around the state. And these two projects I'm talking about were really focused on Playas in Western Kansas. And the projects only came to be because we started getting this high quality LiDAR elevation data in Western Kansas, which allowed us to look at these shallow, as Matt mentioned, these very shallow depressional features that we're calling playa lakes. So there you see the logos at the bottom. Also, Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams has been a very helpful partner for connecting us with landowners as we do some field work on these things. I'm not going to talk really much at all about the field work, but rather the mapping component. We certainly have information about our on-site studies of the ecological functioning and and the health of a lot of the playas in western Kansas. But here's a photo. It's very common. This is one I took a couple of years ago. As Stuart mentioned, I grew up in Northwest Kansas. We farm there are some quite a few playas over there between the Republican River channel section and the Smoky Hill, and there's a band that runs up through eastern or western Rollins County. This is a very common picture. We see here's a bottom. It's a contained drainage. In this case, it happens to run along a section line, so we have a gravel road splitting through it, and you can see you've got what I believe are wheat fields on both sides that are underwater. This is from June, so the wheat is still ripening. It's starting to turn a bit, but those crops are pretty much shot under there. But anyhow, let me continue on and advance my slides. So this same diagram briefly flashed up in Matt's presentation, and I'll talk just a little more to it. These playas sit in uplands, and so in this diagram, some key features are the water table line. You'll notice is below the bottom of the playa basin or the playa floor, and the idea is that these are drainage bottoms. These are what are called endorheic basins or closed catchments, and as the water pools up, it has better infiltration. Almost, I like to think of it as sort of a fast track to the aquifer, or at least a fast track below the root zone, which helps puts it in the queue as it heads down toward the aquifer. Nearby the playa basin, outside the playa rim, there's another area that also has increased infiltration, and then the interplaya zone where we have decreased infiltration. So again, given the playas, this notion is a hot spot for aquifer recharge. So here is I like to call it the world famous Imke Playa. It's about 96 acres, sits on, I think this is the border of Scott and Lane or somewhere in west central Kansas. With the Imke family has a lot of ground around there, and a lot of great playas on their lands, and have been fantastic partners for helping to study and understand these features on the landscape. I think this aerial image probably was collected by Bill Johnson, a retired KU professor and playa expert, and we see some of the main geometric components of a playa, of a large playa in this case. The playa basin, the main water holding area, the annulus, which is an interesting natural sort of rim to a playa. A bench area, which is part of ultimately the playa depression, and then in this case we have a lunette. So this is an older playa that was largely formed via paleo winds, let's say from 10,000-12,000 years ago perhaps, and they came predominantly from the northwest, and so most of the times if we see a big playa and there's a mound that's a lunette, it sits to the southeast of the playa. This one also has an inflow channel and a delta for that channel, again, as a consequence of being a larger feature. So let's put this in the context of the aquifer. So the High Plains Aquifer, which covers from the northern, kind of the southern northern Great Plains to the northern southern Great Plains, it covers about 176,000 square miles by this particular estimate, and about 31,000 of those square miles occur in Kansas. I've got some fun facts here about playas. So on the map on the right, you see the High Plains Aquifer outline again, along with the green outline is the territory of the Playa Lakes joint venture that they take care of. In Nebraska, you see that sharp line there. That is the Rainwater Basin joint venture handles the playa work up there. But you'll notice that the playas very much occur over the top of the High Plains Aquifer, and then there's even though there's a disconnect between the two things, there's certainly some relationship between them. And so as we go through the facts on the left, at least when I was growing up in Northwest Kansas, so somewhere right around here, you know, I often heard them referred to as lagoons or sloughs or buffalo wallows, and only, you know, not till you know, probably the last decade or so did I really understand what these wetland features we were dealing with out there. They were usually, you know, mentioned with a hint of annoyance in the voice because they were painful for farming for the most part, as tend to be wet spots or clay spots in fields, and often a pain to get through. So over this whole region, the PLJV data set, which has come from a variety of sources, a lot of it aerial imagery derived, there's about 72,000 probable playas that have been mapped, totaling about 580,000 acres. Some of the playas, the small, oh, I got 5 minutes. Wow. This is going to go fast. So I mentioned the formation varies from a few hundred years ago for some of the smaller ones to thousands of years ago. They're typically small, shallow, and frequently dry, and they're rainfall fed. They sit above the water table. They are often the only surface water to be found in this dry high plains area, and so they become a biodiversity hotspot. And of course is why they have a great interest from folks like Ducks Unlimited and others. And the hydric clay floor supports infiltration. And as they go through a wet dry cycle, the clay cracks and forms these big macro pores, as they call them. Water pours in there during a runoff event, and makes its way down below the root zone to the aquifer. And then the clay seals up and it retains water, and that's when they become more wetland-like and hold water for that wildlife and other you know, natural or ecosystem services that they provide. So we have about 3 primary clusters in Kansas. I mentioned, so we have the one between the Republican River and the Smoky Hill River in Northwest, and West Central we have between the Smoky and the Ark, and then between the Ark and largely in the Cimarron in the Southwest. We have about 22,000 of these features, largely mapped by Bill Johnson and team that have been incorporated into the PLJV data set, covering about 81,000 acres. Through our Playa LiDAR-based mapping efforts, we have added several thousand more, which hopefully I get to that image here before I get shut out of my break room. Elevation, we have the high plains in the western part of the state. Most playas we look at occur at elevation of about 2,500 feet or higher, and they sit on the uplands and not in the alluvial river valleys. If we overlay a precipitation map, here's another reason for their importance again, is that they hold water in it, and we have very water limited, surface water limited area. Most supplies are occurring in a negative water balance environment where one would have more pan evaporation than precipitation. So it gives you the sense of how important having surface water is there to all of the natural critters and systems in Western Kansas. Land cover, unfortunately, about 84% of our PLJV playas are completely farmed through, and while about 10% are completely grassland, and the balance somewhere in between. Statistics from those 22,000 features from LiDAR focus on the median line. So there's a few really large ones like the MK playa, but the vast majority of these are smaller. So the middle value here, the middle area is about 1.5 acres, and you see with a volume of only about you know, 10% of an acre foot, 12%, and a maximum depth of about 14 centimeters. So it's that shallow basin, like Matt described, is certainly characteristic of the LiDAR of the playa populations that we've mapped previously and our new ones with LiDAR. This map shows water body density across the state, and it is a tale of two halves, the wetter eastern half and the very drier western half. And the one comment, there's good thing there are playas in western Kansas, again, to provide some form of surface water available to all the wildlife that utilizes that part of the state. The central flyway passes right over western Kansas. They see the density of little duck icons here is denser in the western part of the state, and is indicative of the importance of playas, you know, for the migratory bird population that utilizes this pathway. Here's a shot from a playa from our field work with a herd of pronghorn in it, which have become a little more common in western Kansas. This playa is in the middle of a wheat field. Here's another playa that got an old biologist wandering around through it. In this case, it's our very own Don Huggins, who was out there engaged in some of the field work. Here is a playa that's hard to tell is a playa, but is in the middle of a cornfield. And as I mentioned, the vast majority of our playas are farmed through. This is probably one of the best pictures I've taken in my life, and yeah, just because of its composition. But here's a playa in northwest Kansas, in the middle of a cornfield, that is again kind of illustrative of the notion of playas being very much hit or miss when it comes to crops. And most of the time, it's miss if there's any kind of normal rainfall, normal or excess rainfall going on. That church you see, for those of you who know the area, is St. John's, north of Atwood, Kansas. I'm just going to flip through a few more pictures. Here's a couple of playas near a pivot point. This is a common site in ag playas where you have some water quality issues going on for sure. A lot of that with a lot of decaying plant matter, things get pretty stagnant in some of these water holding areas. Dry playa in the middle of a field. Here is a very large, I think 43-acre playa that sits in the middle of a couple of some crossroads. And here's what that same playa looks like in LiDAR. I've got 1 minute. Stuart, I'm not sure what the plan is with this.
Jude, I would say I don't, you know, I'm not going to shut you down as long as KWO doesn't. You can keep going in my mind.
Yeah, I considering what happened earlier, we're going to get booted. We'll see if they allow us to come back in for a few minutes, but
Okay.
possibly not. But anyway, I'll get through as much as I can here. So here we go. Here's the LiDAR of that 42-acre playa. From 2010 NAPE. If we look at different years of NAPE, we can see different water holding characteristics of these, along with a lot of the surrounding playas. Empty playa. Here it sits on the landscape using 2010 NAPE imagery. Here it is in the LiDAR data set. We do have identified some false ridge features, which is one of the problems with using